Ever feel like school kind of missed the mark? You learned all this stuff, but never really got WHY it
Really
mattered.
common feeling, right?
Yeah, like when am I ever going to use this? Well, get ready, because today we're going to dive into something that might just change how you think about education, how we learn, all of that.
We're talking about decolonizing classroom UX.
UX, like websites and apps, UX.
Yep, exactly that. But the cool thing is we can actually apply those same UX design ideas, those principles, to make learning more engaging and way more effective.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what are we diving into today?
An article by Jaime Hoerricks, has a PhD, by the way. It's called Decolonizing Classroom UX, From Mandated Learning to Co-Creation.
Decolonizing. Sounds kind of intense.
It does, right? But really, it's about breaking down that top-down, one-size-fits-all approach we're all used to in education.
The one that assumes everyone learns the same way at the same pace.
Exactly. And let's be honest, that doesn't work for a lot of us.
Big time. So picture this. You're stuck in algebra-tesic, staring at logarithms and wondering, like, when will I ever need this? The article says that disconnect between what we're taught and how we actually use it, that's a huge GE problem, especially in upper-level math.
It's like we're giving students this pre-packaged learning experience, abstract concepts, no real-world context, and then we wonder why they're not into it.
Right. But this article takes it a step further, right? Saying this approach to education is actually rooted in colonial models.
Which, if you think about it, makes sense. Colonialism, it was all about imposing control, dictating what was valuable, right? And in a way, our education system kind of does the same thing with standardized tests, pacing guides, preset curricula. It doesn't leave a lot of room for what individuals need.
Or their interests. It's like, here's what you need to learn, doesn't matter who you are or what you want to do.
And that can be super alienating for students, especially, the ones who already feel kind of marginalized, like they don't quite fit in the traditional system.
Yeah. And this article uses some examples, some really specific ones, to show this disconnect. Okay. Think about students who are on a healthcare track, aspiring radiology technicians or nurses.
Mm-hmm.
You think they'd ever care about logarithms?
Oh, but they use them every day, probably without even realizing it.
Really?
Radiology techs, they use logarithms to figure out safe radiation levels for patients, for staff, everyone. It's all about understanding how radiation, how strong it is, decreases over distance. It's vital to their job.
So they're using this thing that seems super abstract to literally keep people safe. That's pretty awesome when you put it that way.
And nurses, they use logarithms to understand pH level.
pH, like how acidic something is.
Yeah. And that's super important for figuring out things like stomach acidity, and how that affects their patient's health.
Okay, so maybe we got to stop thinking that math is only for mathematicians. We got to show students that it's woven into everything. But how do we bridge that gap?
Well, the article offers a solution, and it's called co-creation.
Co-creation. What's that about?
Basically, it's flipping the script, moving away from the teacher as the only source of knowledge. In co-creation, you're empowering students to be part of shaping what and how they learn.
Sounds amazing, but how do you make that work in the real world with standardized tests and, all of those pacing guides?
That is the million-dollar question. And honestly, the article doesn't pretend it's easy, but the main point is this. Co-creation isn't about throwing everything out. You don't abandon standards or get rid of the curriculum.
So you're not just saying, okay, kids, learn whatever you want.
No way. It's about weaving those standards, the things they need to know, into a process that is way more engaging and personalized.
So less about scrapping the system, more about making it work for everyone.
Yeah. And one way to do that is by starting the year differently. The article calls it a skeleton plan. Instead of diving right into specific lessons, the teacher outlines broad topics, the big ideas they need to cover. And then, and this is the cool part, the students get to connect those topics to what they're interested in, to their own goals.
So instead of just launching into, exponents, the teacher might ask, okay, how can we use exponents to understand something that you're interested in?
Exactly. Imagine a student, they're super into music, and they ask, how do exponents relate to sound frequencies? The stuff that makes music production work. That's a golden opportunity to show how math is behind something they already love.
Okay, that would make learning way more engaging. I'm on board.
Yeah.
But with, 30 kids in a classroom, all with different interests, how does a teacher manage that?
It definitely takes a different way of thinking, a different way of planning for sure. But the article talks about some frameworks that can help teachers actually DO co-creation. One that's really interesting is understanding by design. UBD for short.
I've heard of UBD, but I'll admit I'm not totally sure I get it. Can you break it down?
UBD is about designing learning backward. So you don't start with the textbook, you start with the goal. What do you want the students to really understand? And how will you know they've got it?
Okay, so it's not just about covering content. It's about focusing on the essential understanding.
Yes, and instead of just traditional tests, UBD uses performance tasks. So the students show what they know through activities or projects. It's a lot more authentic.
So instead of just memorizing facts for a multiple choice test, they might create a presentation, design an experiment, or even build something, right, to show what they've learned.
Exactly, and that's where the co-creation comes back in. Instead of the teacher saying, this is the project, they work with the students to design tasks that hit those curriculum standards and match their individual interests.
Okay, this is sounding kind of revolutionary, I'm not going to lie. But let's be real. There are always challenges, right?
Of course. The article doesn't, pretend it's all sunshine and rainbows. You've got standardized testing, those pacing guides, the expectation that on day one, you hit the ground running. It's a lot.
So how do we deal with that? Is this co-creation even possible in the real world?
That is the AE question. And it's a perfect place to stop for now. When we come back, we'll dig into the specific strategies and solutions, the stuff that teachers can actually use to make this shift to co-creation a reality. It's going to be good, I promise.
All right, we're back. Still diving deep into decolonizing classroom UX, and honestly, my head is spinning a little bit.
It's a lot to unpack, right?
It is.
Yeah.
We've talked about the problems with the traditional way of doing things. We've even explored some potential solutions like co-creation and UBD. But now I'm really wondering, how do you actually make this work in the real world? With standardized tests and strict schedules, it just seems like a lot for a teacher to handle.
It is a big shift. There's no doubt about that. But this article, it doesn't just, point fingers and complain. It actually gets into some pretty cool solutions. And a lot of them come back to that UBD framework we were talking about.
Right. Understanding by design. I'll be honest, I've always kind of thought of UBD as just a fancy way to plan lessons. But is it really enough to, address something as big and as systemic as standardized testing?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it gets right to the heart of what UBD is all about. See, it's not just about lesson planning. It's a whole philosophy. It makes you think differently about what you're teaching and why.
Okay, so walk me through it.
Sure.
How would UBD actually help a teacher who's, feeling that pressure to teach to the test?
Let's say you're a teacher and you're feeling trapped by those standardized learning goals. UBD says, okay, let's work backward. Start with that big idea you want your students to get. Not just facts they can memorize and then forget, but a real deep understanding of a concept they can use in different situations.
So instead of teaching logarithms all by themselves, you might focus on the bigger picture. The idea of mathematical relationships and how those show up everywhere, not just in math class.
Exactly. And here's the really important part. UBD makes you design assessments that actually measure that understanding. Not just those multiple choice tests, but authentic performance tasks.
I wish my math classes had been like that. I remember hating logarithms, never got why they mattered. But a performance task,
Yeah.
now that can have made a difference.
Think about it. Instead of solving equations on a worksheet, you're given a challenge, like designing a clothing collection using geometric principles.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You're sketching, you're figuring out fabric measurements. You might even present your designs to the class. And you'd have to explain the math behind your choices.
Wow, that is actually really cool. It takes something abstract like logarithms and makes it real. But wouldn't managing something like that with 30 kids be a logistical nightmare?
It definitely takes planning, and you got to be flexible. But that's where the whole co-creation part comes in. Instead of the teacher being the one who decides every single detail, the students get to have a say in shaping those performance tasks. It's not just about meeting standards anymore. It's about them exploring their interests through a mathematical lens.
So a student who loves music could design a project around sound frequencies and how mixing boards work. And someone who's into sports could analyze player stats or even design a stadium.
You got it. And the teacher becomes more of a facilitator, guiding the process, making sure they have the resources they need, and helping them connect those passions to the curriculum.
This is really making me rethink what a classroom could be.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about the human side of things. This article talks a lot about building relationships, building trust. How does that fit into this whole UBD co-creation picture?
It's at the core of it all, really. Think about it. If students don't feel safe, safe to share their ideas, to take risks, to maybe even fail sometimes, then co-creation just won't work. And that's where that easing in period we talked about is so important.
Right, that time at the beginning of the school year. When you focus on building a sense of community, getting to know your students, setting up some ground rules.
And here's a radical idea the article throws out. Why not let the students co-create those norms and expectations? Instead of the teacher just handing them a list of rules, they get to be part of shaping the classroom culture.
That's pretty bold. But I can see how it would give them a sense of ownership, a sense of responsibility. They're not just following rules, they're helping create a space where everyone feels comfortable and respected.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. The article also talks about getting families involved in the co-creation process.
Oh, that's interesting. It always kind of frustrated me, when my parents would ask, so what did you learn in school today? And I had no clue how to explain it. Like, how do you sum up logarithms to someone who hasn't seen a math equation in, decades?
I know, right? But imagine this. Instead of a boring, generic lesson on logarithms, you have a parent who's a nurse come in and talk about how they use logarithms every day to assess their patient's health. Suddenly, it's not this abstract concept in a textbook. It's something real, something that actually makes a difference.
Okay, you've convinced me. I'm fully on board with this co-creation thing. But let's, be practical for a second. What are some concrete things a teacher can do to actually implement this?
You don't have to do everything at once, you know? You don't have to completely reinvent your whole teaching style overnight. The article suggests starting small. Maybe you let your students choose between a couple of topics for a research project, or you give them some say in how they're assessed. Little things like that can make a big difference.
That's encouraging to hear. And I imagine the more you do it, the more comfortable you become.
Yeah.
Letting go of some of that control and trusting the process.
Totally. And it's important to remember, co-creation isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about responding to the needs of your specific students, being willing to experiment, and not being afraid to try things out, even if you're not sure how they'll turn out.
So it's like we're all on this learning journey together,
Yeah.
teachers and students.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so exciting. And now I think I know what you're thinking.
Hold on, are you psychic now?
Haha, not quite. But I'm guessing you're wondering what happens when you hit those inevitable roadblocks. What about those colleagues who think this whole co-creation thing is way too radical, or administrators who are obsessed with test scores?
You read my mind.
Yeah.
Because let's be real, change can be scary, especially in a system that's been doing things the same way for so long.
That's where things get really interesting. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the final part of our deep dive. How do we navigate those challenges? How do we advocate for our students? And ultimately, how do we create a learning environment that is truly empowering for everyone? Stay tuned, because it's about to get real.
We're back, and it's time for the final part of our deep dive into decolonizing classroom UX. Honestly, I'm feeling super inspired, but also a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's a lot, right?
We've talked about all the problems with traditional education, explored solutions like co-creation and UBD, but now I'm hitting that wall of, okay, but how do I actually do this?
It's the question, isn't it? And the article doesn't shy away from it. There's going to be pushback. It's inevitable.
I bet a lot of people listening are like, this all sounds amazing, but my school would never go for it. What do you say to them?
I'd say, first of all, you are not alone. That feeling is real. The article talks about how one of the biggest hurdles is the mindset shift. We're so used to this top-down, standardized way of doing things in education that anything else feels, kind of radical, maybe even a little dangerous.
Yeah, it's like we've been given this kit, this prepackaged curriculum with step-by-step instructions, and now we're saying, hold on, what if we toss those instructions and made something totally new?
I love that. We're chefs in the kitchen, right? And sometimes the best meals come from experimenting, taking risks, trusting your gut.
Okay, I'm with you. So let's say I'm a teacher. I'm all in on this co-creation thing. Where do I even begin? How do I convince my colleagues, my principal, maybe even some parents who aren't so sure?
The article really stresses the power of starting small. You don't have to revolutionize the whole school in one go. Just pick one class, one unit, even just one project where you can weave in some co-creation.
So baby steps, but strategic baby steps.
Exactly. And then as you start seeing those little wins, those moments where your students really get it, you gather evidence. Proof that this works. You can share those successes with your colleagues, show off what your students are creating, and prove that co-creation isn't about lowering standards, it's about making learning more powerful.
The thing that really struck me about this article is how it's not just about making learning fun or relevant. It's about giving students the skills they need to actually thrive in a world that's like constantly changing.
So important. Think about it. We're throwing information at kids all the time. The jobs they'll have in the future, we don't even know what they'll be yet. So the ability to think critically, to solve problems together, to connect what they're learning to real-world stuff, that's what matters.
Yeah, if they can't adapt, they're going to be in trouble.
And co-creation helps them build those skills naturally. It encourages them to be curious, to question things, to find their own voice and use it to make a difference.
You know what? This whole conversation has me feeling hopeful. Like, yeah, the current system has a lot of problems. But there are people out there, teachers like the author of this article, who are trying new things, pushing boundaries, and creating amazing experiences for their students.
They are the change makers. They're proving that change is possible, that education can be truly transformative, and that we don't have to accept a system that leaves so many kids behind.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure.
I know I'm walking away with a ton of new ideas and like a renewed sense of possibility for what education could be.
And I hope our listeners are feeling that too, because this article, it's not just theory, it's a call to action. So to everyone listening, what resonated with YU? What's one small step you can take in your own classroom, your own home, to make learning a little more collaborative, a little more empowering, a little more human? Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about schools, it's about building a world where every learner feels seen, valued, and ready to make their mark. So keep asking questions, keep pushing boundaries, and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us